What's the cutest story you know of how a couple got together? A friend of ours was married and found out he had cancer. His wife left him because of it, I guess. A friend of his with really good insurance suggested they get married just for the benefits for him medically. After a while, it just clicked that they actually loved each other very much and they stayed married even after he went into remission and are one of the coolest couples we know. Sitting on a train traveling back home from London, I was behind a large group of people who were on their way home from their friend's wedding. One of them asked how the friend met their spouse, and apparently their friend had been on a flight from London to Australia to go traveling for a few months. She didn't have a full itinerary planned, but roughly knew what she was doing. She was traveling alone, but her seatmate struck up a conversation. They had a great time and found out they'd even studied the same subject at university. They parted ways when they landed in Hong Kong. When they boarded the next flight in Hong Kong, however, they found they were again seated next to each other. Upon landing in Australia, the guy was supposed to go on to New Zealand, but they both decided to ditch their plans and travel together. They've been together ever since. Air Force Doc told me about how she was in a combat zone and needed air support. The pilot who answered her call and picked her up had a really soothing voice, so she went out of her way to find him again and thank him for his help. They ended up getting married and have a kid together now. My mother was an elementary school teacher who assigned a class project to write a letter to people in the military to be delivered randomly. My dad was in the Navy and didn't get much mail, so when extra randomly assigned mail came in, he would sometimes get it. Turns out, my dad got my mom's letter and decided to write back. I think I saw this on here once. A girl was helping her friend, also female, talk to some guy on Tinder. They matched with and set up a date with a fellow, and come the right time, the girl who was supposed to be meeting him backed out. The girl that was helping originally thought he was too cute to let go, so she went herself and sat at a table near the guy and pretended that she was also being stood up, and they got to talking. The rest is history. My grandparents met on New Year's Eve on the subway in New York City. My grandfather was an immigrant from Denmark, and he was seriously considering returning home at the time. My grandmother moved up from the south because she hated it there. My grandfather saw her and thought, I want to go on a date with her. My grandmother saw him and thought, that's the guy I'm going to marry. My grandfather asked for directions to the ferry he already knew. They wound up talking. My grandfather ditched his relatives to go back to my grandmother's apartment. I don't think anything happened, because her roommate's cooking gave him food poisoning. The next day, he convinced her to kiss him for his father's birthday. He hated his father at the time. When he left, she got an atlas to try to figure out where he was from. A few weeks later, her dad died and she had to go home. She called him to say she wouldn't see him for a little while. He decided that if, after only a few weeks, he was so important to her she had to tell him she was going away, then she was the one. When she came back to New York, he proposed. They got married 3 months after meeting. They had 4 children and were happily married for 20 years until she died of cancer. By all accounts, they never fought and were in love until she died. My brother went through a divorce, got custody of the kids, single for 2 years. Did the soccer mom or dad thing. Son was in 5th grade and he went to parent-teachers conference twice to confer with his teacher. School's out, his son has a note from the teacher. It said, if you are interested in a relationship, please meet me at the school near the flagpole at 9 p.m. Creepy, but he went because she was a hot babe. He gets to the school and she is parked by the flagpole in her Jeep. She had gone out and purchased a yellow strobe light to make sure he would find her in an empty parking lot at 9 p.m. in the evening. They have been married for over 25 years. This is the story of how my parents got together and stayed together. My mother has always been very academic from a young age. My father was certainly not academic, but a good worker. My dad also came from a difficult background and he and his sister were in foster care since they were young. They were also physically abused by the foster mother they had for 12 years. My parents were friends since they were children, and they took each other to the Debs, or prom. A few months after Debs, they started hooking up. One of these hookups resulted in me. My mother was 17 and my father was 16 at the time. She was in her first year in college and was doing very well. My father was after recently being placed in a new foster home with a much nicer guardian. He wasn't going to finish school and had a plan to drop out as soon as he got a job. When they learned my mom was pregnant, it was obviously a bombshell. My mother has been very open with me in her considerations of aborting me before she told my father, as she thought she'd be doing it on her own and on minimum wage. She and my father had a talk and decided they would keep me, and decided right there to be in a relationship. They basically already were anyway. My mother completed her first year of college and then gave birth to me. Both my parents still lived separately that summer. My mother decided to keep up college, even though it was 3 hours away. My 17-year-old father took me to live with him and his foster parents. He stayed on in school as he wanted a backup plan in case his idea for his own landscaping company failed, all while raising a baby. My mother would travel down every weekend to see me. She said those years were the hardest of her life. As I was growing up, they presented me with every opportunity they knew of. I was involved in various sports clubs. I played piano since I was 4, and my father even learned basic French and Irish so he could help me with my homework because he never had any help. This is the same guy who hated everything to do with school and still struggles with basic maths. They have since told me they often didn't eat, as all these things cost so much and they were barely stable back then. My mother completed her degree in anthropology and has been in good jobs ever since. My father completed school even though he hated it and immediately went to work as a farmhand, eventually building his own landscaping company from the ground. I am now 20 years old and my parents have given everything for me. I also have 3 younger siblings aged 11, 8, and 5. My parents' new friends are always shocked when they find out about the much older daughter and calculate mine and my parents' ages in their heads. My parents are still madly in love. They have really good jobs and a great social circle. You couldn't meet two people who are more different and yet they somehow make it work. They broke every stereotype possible when it comes to unplanned teenage pregnancy, and I couldn't be more proud of them. I was a graduate teaching assistant. My office mate left for a class and dropped his checkbook. I had the same class, so I picked it up to give it to him. Walked into class. He was on the other side of the room. Me to him. "I have your checkbook." Him to me. "Throw it to me." I threw it to him and it sailed across the room and far away from him. He walked to the back of the room to pick it up. Snarky girl a couple of rows away. "Boy, are you a lousy shot." Me. Awkward silence. Couple of weeks later, I wanted to go to a concert. The only one I could think of who might be interested was Snarky Girl. In a moment of weakness, she said, "Yes, our 50th anniversary is next year." Time hath not dulled her snarkiness. One afternoon, I got bored and put an ad up on Yahoo Personals. This was 2001. Some guy got bored and responded to it. We got to talking, and it turned out that even though we lived in different towns and went to different high schools, we knew some of the same people. In fact, his sister and my friend Patrick dated for a while. What makes this sort of adorable is, at one point, Patrick wanted to set me up with him. "You'd love Carrie's brother. He's so much like you, it's crazy." And I turned down that offer because at the time, I did not like blind dates. Carrie's brother, aka the guy I met on Yahoo, and I celebrated our 15th wedding anniversary in April. In a non-related twist, both Carrie and Patrick are gay, as it turned out. So the Cubs had just won the World Series for the first time in 108 years, and 5 million people swarmed the streets of downtown the day of the parade to celebrate. A little tipsy, I run into a guy in the crowd, literally run into, as in I trip all over him and nearly knock him over. I look up at him and say without thinking, "You're hot." And he looks at me and says, "You're beautiful." And before I can process, he kisses me in the middle of the sea of blue sports fans. We just start making out like no one's watching. After sobering up a bit, he asks me on a date. I agree. We talk, and it turns out we have a lot in common. We really hit it off. Now, we are just a couple weeks away from our 1-year anniversary. I found my best friend and love of my life that day. My mom and dad worked at a juvenile detention center together. My mom was, and is, a major nerd, and my dad was a jock, and they were both right out of college when they met. Apparently, my dad had a reputation for sleeping around with slow girls and being kind of a douche. But when he was around my mom, he got really quiet and shy because he was intimidated by her intelligence. My mom didn't like him very much, but one day he asked her out and brought her flowers, and she said yes just to give him a chance. Then they started dating. A few years into their relationship, she saw him leaving her best friend's house and got really upset and started crying and yelling at him. He drove away feeling really guilty, not able to explain himself. When my mom confronted her friend about what he was doing there, her friend explained that my dad was talking to her because he felt like he wasn't good enough for my mom because she was so much smarter, organized, disciplined than he was, and how he felt guilty about how many girls he had slept with beforehand. They got married a few months later and squirted me out 3 years into their marriage. Still together after 24 years. The best was when a very cute female student who had been a piano major joined the organ performance class I was teaching and fell for the most talented guy in the group. They started playing organ duets by the end of the second semester and married soon after graduation. Everyone in the department liked them and supported their relationship throughout. 2 of my regulars at the gym come in wearing matching outfits for their daily workouts. In the week when her husband was out with the flu, she told me they actually had met in a gym. They spent weeks catching each other's eyes and waving hello before she got fed up and went up to him. She said, "This is ridiculous. I see you every day and don't know your name. I'm Rachel." And in her words, he took her hand and never let go. They are crazy in love and wait to start their workouts until the other one reaches the gym. Ex-boyfriend's parents. His mom was talking to a dude in a chat room and had been for most of that year. She was complaining about some neighbor's dog barking and how it wouldn't shut up. Turns out it was this guy's dog and they lived 2 houses away from each other. My mom's sister was asked out on a date and my grandpa said she could only go if my mom went too. Aunt is 15, mom is 13. So this guy gets his best friend, my dad, to double date. My mom hates my dad, but my aunt and her guy hit it off. They start dating, and the 4 of them hang out quite a bit. About a year later, my dad asks my mom out again, and he's grown on her, so she says yes. They date for a few years, and when my mom is 17, he asks her to marry him. She says no. They continue to date. A year after that, when she's 18, he asks her to marry him again. This time, she says yes. My aunt and her guy are still together and have also gotten engaged. They have a double wedding. My parents just celebrated their 36th anniversary. My uncle passed away 6 years ago. Aunt hasn't dated anyone since. He was the love of her life. My mom recently went to a wedding at the same chapel they got married at, and they still have the newspaper article written about the double wedding hanging in their vestibule. I met my fiancé by offering her my umbrella when it was raining, and we walked through Washington Square Park at night together. I know a couple past clients of mine in their 70s that were born in the same hospital on the same night. Their social security numbers differ by 1 digit. Grew up in the same town and got married young. Not exactly what you're looking for, but I always thought that was cool. Thank you so much for watching. If you liked this video, don't forget to hit the like button, comment down below your thoughts or suggestions, and subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. See you in the next video.